Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen Bennett, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
Now, last Friday we had our second day of the spring conference, and it was a great programme, Dennis. Really interesting. We kicked off with Mark Heath looking at elections.
Oh, yes,
So he is the oracle. I think we called him the guru. I think he's thinking about
certainly.
a change of title to his name to incorporate that. But that was really interesting. And we also we looked at data protection. That actually was fascinating. That was from Wimbledon Dickinson. And
Mm,
that wasn't just talking about data protection, what the law says. That was a really deep technological exploration of the
excellent.
tools that are out there and what can be done, and what you need to be mindful of. And it actually didn't sound like a lawyer talking, sounded like a
Mm,
tech expert talking. It was fascinating. And
good.
then of course we had the Mazur session live after Mazur with the SRA and Silex and the wonderful Katie Bray. We're going to talk about that later in the podcast.
Indeed.
But what's first today, Dennis?
Well, yes, we're going to start off with the Supreme Court case concerning what has become known over the years as the Cheshire West case. The Care Quality Commission has acknowledged that the recent Supreme Court ruling on deprivation of liberty may cause uncertainty, as it has an impact on people who use services, providers, and local authorities.
Yes, this is the news that the Supreme Court judgment overturned its own ruling in 2014 in Cheshire West, which it said was wrongly decided. Now, the latest judgment establishes a new approach to establishing whether a person may be deprived of their liberty.
Yes, in a statement, the CQC said this was a significant development in case law, setting out a new approach to establishing whether a person may be deprived of their liberty. And it added that it is discussing the ruling with the Department of Health and Social Care and other key partners.
Yeah, and in the meantime, it's attempted to set out what the judgment means for providers, saying, quote, the judgment has immediate effect. This means that providers need to familiarise themselves with this legal development and adjust their practice accordingly. Easier said than done, I would say.
Indeed, and going on, they say, we recognise that this judgment may lead to questions about how the different factors should be interpreted and applied in practice. Where appropriate, providers may need to obtain legal advice to ensure that they are compliant with the law while they are waiting for any official guidance to be published.
Now, just to say, actually, we have been asked by members to look at producing some sort of guidance in relation to this. Capsticks, I believe, actually did a blog on it quite recently.
Yes.
We are, yeah, thank you, Dennis. We are exploring what we might be able to do with our with one of our corporate partners in relation to some more explanation around this to help people actually on the ground. Because as you said, Dennis, we're waiting on guidance. So, and everyone's
Mm,
got lots of questions. And what we don't want is members to have to fire off, you know, 400 different instructions to counsel to get
mm,
the or to the big legal firms to
yeah.
figure out what it is they've got to do. But back to the piece. So the CQC said it would adopt a proportionate approach in its assessments, which is pleasing to hear, while it works with partners in the health and care system to determine the practical impact of this revised position.
The regulator said its assessments would still focus on ensuring that providers continue to demonstrate that they are considering, on a case by case basis, whether an authorization to deprive someone of their liberty may be required, and to provide person centered care using effective ways to gather the views of each person using the service about their care.
Yes, and also that to meet the requirements of the Mental Capacity Act 2005, including acting in a person's best interests, irrespective of whether they are deprived of their liberty. Interesting. So, providers are still required to comply with the requirements set by the Health and Social Care Act 2008 and associated regulations, the CQE. I'll get this right in a minute. The CQC also advised and reminded us. So look out for more guidance and more signposting in that area. We haven't heard the last of that. Now, every fortnight we turn to news from Wales. I want to give a little shout out to Gareth Owens from Flintshire. It was delightful hearing from him on day two of our spring conference, and he explained the standards regime in Wales, which of course is very, very different. And it is possible, he said, that due to more joint working between what was the Labour majority in the Senate and Westminster, and we know that's changed now, but nevertheless, the ties are still strong, that in fact, we may, by that I mean England, may take lessons from Wales in regards to the long awaited changes in our standards regime in England. So that's fascinating because Wales is very, very interesting in its approach. Dennis, let's turn now to a roundup for Wales.
Yes, well, turning to the Senate, there were no new acts, regulations, or bills published during the last 2 weeks. And perhaps I should explain here, Helen, that this is due in large measure to the recent May elections, because Plaid Cymru, the Plaid Cymru government is expected to establish, and hasn't done so yet, expected to establish its committee structure by the autumn, and is currently conducting its administration via a newly established business committee. So it will take some time for new legislation to come through. Nonetheless, there are three recent Senate research briefings. First, one entitled What's Next for Nature and Climate Action, which highlights the scale of the challenge facing the Seventh Senate, with statutory environmental targets likely to put pressure on the new Welsh Government to align planning, land use, and public spending with climate and biodiversity commitments.
Yeah, and I would say, Dennis, that for local authorities, this does reinforce the legal significance of climate duties in decision making and development control. Now, another publication, and it's entitled A System Under Strain: The Sustainability of Local Government, underlines the entrenched financial pressures on councils despite increases in core funding and council tax. Rising demand, inflation, and workforce constraints are identified as structural risks, with implications for service delivery, statutory compliance, and the growing importance of robust prioritisation and risk management.
And still on finance, there's also been published a paper entitled Wales Budget and Public Finances, Past Changes and Future Challenges. Now, this traces the post-pandemic funding environment and signals continued fiscal constraint as a defining feature of the next Senate term.
Mm. And procurement and contract management feature prominently. Welsh Procurement Policy Note, that's WPPN 011 for the citation. That provides updated advice on the use of project bank accounts. So that reinforces expectations on things like fair payment and supply chain protection for Welsh contracting authorities. So this sits alongside refreshed guidance on strengthening contract management capability across the Welsh public sector and the updated clause notification log under the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Wales Act 2023, all of which warrant careful attention by the legal and procurement teams in Wales.
And there have been oral statements. These were issued on the 9th of June, and these set out ministerial priorities for local government, housing and planning, and for social justice and equality. Now, while these are high level, they do indicate continued emphasis on housing delivery, planning reform, and equality-based policy making. And the publication of the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Act 2026 clarifies the developing statutory framework affecting education authorities. And there's been an updated ministerial code that was issued on the 28th of May.
Well, recent Welsh planning decisions reported in the press illustrate ongoing tensions between housing delivery, regeneration, environmental protection, same as England, but also additionally Welsh language considerations. Now, approvals for council housing schemes, net zero school development, and tourism expansion contrast with controversy around large scale holiday parks and caravan sites.
And the bulletin includes a standards case involving the suspension of a councillor over a planning application involving a personal connection, underlying, of course, the continuing importance of probity, declarations of interest, and standards enforcement.
And finally, some excellent work in the form of Swansea Council's successful prosecution of Kismet Kebabs Limited, resulting in a, wait for it, £500,000 fine and substantial costs, which demonstrates the continued enforcement role of Welsh local authorities in trading standards and food safety, and the court's willingness, of course, to impose significant penalties for prolonged dishonesty. Dishonesty. That's a huge fine, Dennis, there.
I was just thinking that that's a lot of kebabs, isn't it?
Oh dear. Now, let's turn to legal futures and news from the SRA.
Indeed, this is the latest article. The SRA is in the news a lot, isn't it? The legal profession's negativity about the Solicitors Regulation Authority has increased markedly, but according to a report, but most are still positive about it, according to the regulator's own research. It also found a decrease in trust and confidence in legal services among consumers, as well as in the proportion of consumers who believe legal services are well regulated.
Well, the SRA's purpose, according to its 23 to 26 corporate strategy, and it's currently revising that or taking steps to look at it and examine it. But that purpose is to drive confidence and trust in the sector. And in 2024, it commissioned independent research agency Thinks Insight and Strategy to understand current levels of trust and confidence and the key components and how best to increase them.
Now, this reported that most people have trust and confidence in legal services, but would like the SRA to do more on their cost. It also benchmarked views so the SRA could assess progress over the life of the corporate strategy.
Well, Thinks, which I think is a rather natty way of referring to them, Thinks carried out a follow-up survey a year later with the fieldwork done in May to July 2025, so last year. But the results have only just been published. Now, the SRA told Legal Futures that this was due to other priorities. And that survey recorded that while 51% of legal professionals did have a positive view of the SRA, and let's just say that's 51, not great, 34% did not. So that's up 8 percentage points on 2024 results.
And asked if the SRA has increased trust and confidence in legal services, 46% of legal professionals said yes, but 29%, up 4 percentage points, said no. Thinks found that overall positivity about legal regulators and other regulators was falling, and the SRA was the most known and positively viewed of the main legal regulators.
Yeah, well, that's not a great indictment, is it?
It isn't.
The SRA has recently proposed a 29% increase in its budget, so I understand. Uh,
Yep.
but we know where the majority of that's coming from. So, notwithstanding the survey's findings, the 59% of people thought that the regulator should keep its budget the same and not risk increasing cost of legal services, even if it thought it needed more funding. But it's going to happen.
And views were split around 40% either way as to whether the SRA should reduce spending, even if it reduced protections. So, practice certificates are about to cost more. Is the SRA worth it? Let us know what you think on the LLG website.
Yes, please do. Let's stick with the SRA, and this isn't actually in the bulletin because it was breaking news and it's long
Mm.
awaited. It broke on Friday, and it's the guidance from the SRA following the Mazur appeal. Now, we don't have time to review this in detail here, but LLG will be looking at its own guidance following its release, and also we had our session at day 2 of the spring conference. As I've said earlier, we heard from the SRA, we heard from Silex and the wonderful Katie Bray of Essex Council, who did a really remarkable schedule about what constitutes reserved and non-reserved work within a county authority. Now that's available on the website.
All of the detail for this will be in this week's bulletin,
That's
Bulletin
right.
23. The guidance is called Effective Supervision Guidance, updated, as you say, last Friday, and it reinforces a central principle. Robust supervision is fundamental to delivering lawful, ethical, and high-quality legal services. For local government lawyers operating in complex, high-risk public law environments, its practical implications are indeed extremely significant.
Well, the SRA emphasises that solicitors and firms remain accountable for all work undertaken by those they supervise, including unqualified staff and external contributors. Nothing new there. Effective supervision is not optional. It underpins public confidence, they say, client protection, and compliance with the SRA standards and regulations.
And there is no single supervisory model. Authorities should tailor arrangements based on the nature of the work, the risks to clients, and the experience and competence of staff. High risk or complex matters, as you would expect, demand closer, more frequent oversight, whereas routine work may justify a lighter touch review.
Well, following recent Court of Appeal clarification, unauthorised individuals may undertake litigation tasks, but the authorised solicitor does retain full responsibility for those activities, and this makes clear delegation frameworks, supervision, and quality assurance processes absolutely critical within local authority legal teams.
Supervisors must maintain meaningful oversight through regular engagement, visibility of casework, and timely guidance. Now, this may involve file reviews, sampling work, or monitoring all matters in high risk areas. Crucially, supervision should occur throughout a matter, not only at final sign off, and should include direct communication with supervisees.
Well, the guidance highlights the importance of clear governance structures. As we've said, documented supervision arrangements and audit trails, they're very important. Firms must be able to justify, and therefore local authorities, how their systems achieve compliance and demonstrate active oversight. So recording rationale, decisions and supervision activity is clearly a key safeguard for local authority legal departments.
Effective supervision depends on choosing appropriately experienced supervisors with sufficient capacity. Overstretching supervisors risks being superficial oversight. Equally, organisations must ensure staff are competent, supported, and encouraged to escalate issues. Clearly, this links supervision closely with workplace culture and well-being.
It does. The guidance also emphasises that merely having structures in place is insufficient, because supervision must actively function in practice. So firms must ensure clarity over roles, responsibilities, and reporting lines. And supervisors must have sufficient capacity and expertise. That's going to be the rub, I think. Well, not the expertise part, but the capacity element. For local authorities facing resource constraints, I think this does reinforce the need to balance caseload pressures against supervisory duties. I know, Dennis, that there are lots of principal lawyers with big teams running
Yes,
huge caseloads themselves.
indeed.
So there's still a lot of questions for local authorities, and I said at the top of the item, LLG are examining what guidance it might be able to produce together with campaign activity around the Legal Services Act itself, actually. So there we go. Still ongoing, I think, is the way to look at that.
Indeed.
Now, we touched on standards in Wales earlier, Dennis, but let's return to standards in England.
Yes, well, as you know, since the King's speech, everyone has been asking the question, is the government still committed to standards reform? Now, Baroness Taylor has described local government standards reform as a key issue and reaffirmed the government's commitment to overhauling the local government standards and conduct framework, quote, as soon as parliamentary time allows. The comments were made by the Lords Minister for Housing and Local Government during a House of Lords debate on councillor well-being, and this took place on Thursday, the 4th of June.
Yeah, so following a consultation last year, the government committed to introducing a mandatory code of conduct for councillors. We all know this, requiring all principal authorities to establish formal standard committees, creating new powers to suspend elected members for up to 6 months for serious breaches of the code of conduct, amongst other measures.
However, concerns have recently been raised by the sector and including LLG after the proposed reforms were omitted from the King's speech earlier this year. Responding to those concerns, Baroness Taylor told peers that the reforms remain on the government's agenda. Baroness Taylor said abuse and intimidation of local councillors, whether online or in person, were totally unacceptable.
Yeah, she went on to highlight as well a number of government initiatives aimed at tackling abuse, including Operation Ford, which established dedicated elected official advisors in every police force to provide security briefings and work with local authorities to coordinate support where heightened risks are identified. And she said, for democracy to thrive, we need to make sure that we attract the widest range of people to seek to serve their communities.
And meanwhile, she said the government's forthcoming Representation of the People bill would introduce tougher sentences for those who abuse candidates, campaigners, elected representatives, and electoral staff. And going on, she said, in addition, we will remove the requirement for election agents, including candidates acting as their own agents, to have home addresses published on the notice of election agents, she added.
Addressing concerns raised during the debate about protecting free speech, Baroness Taylor said the measures being pursued by the government applied only to criminal intimidation or harassment, not to legitimate disagreement, protesting, or campaigning, which is important for the right balance to be struck.
Yes,
Baroness Taylor is also a supporter of remote meeting provision as well. So she's a strong voice in the House of Lords for some of our campaigns, that's for sure.
indeed.
Now, for our final item of this edition, I'm turning to the LGA and the independent analysis of send reform. Dennis.
Yes, a recent local government association report entitled Send Reform: Opportunity for Improved Outcomes Amid Structural Risk. This provides a measured but cautionary assessment of the government's proposed reforms to the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Framework. Now, while the direction of travel appears broadly welcomed by councils, the findings highlight a system under immediate strain and expose legal and financial uncertainties that are highly relevant to local government practitioners.
Yes, so the core message is one of conditional optimism. A significant majority of councils, 81% in fact, believe the reforms could improve outcomes for children and young people with SEND, while 94% anticipate a stronger emphasis on early intervention.
Now, this aligns with the government's intention to replace education, health, and care plans with a more tiered approach to support, ostensibly simplifying access and promoting consistency. However, only 43% of councils consider that the reforms are likely to deliver financial sustainability, underscoring a mismatch between policy ambition and fiscal confidence.
Well, for local authority lawyers, the transitional risk is particularly acute. The report warns that the current system remains peculiarly vulnerable, driven by a surge in demand for each CHP assessments during the period between policy announcement and legislative implementation, expected by 2029.
Now, evidence suggests that some authorities have already experienced demand spikes of up to one-third above typical levels, likely reflecting parental action to secure existing statutory entitlements before reform takes effect. This creates immediate legal and operational pressures in relation to assessment duties, statutory timescales, and tribunal exposure.
And there's also a clear risk of divergence between projected and actual demand. Should EHCP numbers increase beyond government forecasts, councils may face escalating obligations without commensurate funding.
The report explicitly calls for central government to absorb additional costs arising from systemic failure, rather than transferring this burden to local authorities. In the absence of detail on post-2028 funding arrangements, this presents a material uncertainty for financial planning and may give rise to disputes regarding statutory duties versus available resources.
Well, broadly, then the takeaway, and it's pretty obvious, I would say, is that the success of the reforms is contingent not only on their design, but on coherent, fully funded implementation. And that's the same with pretty much everything local authority
Yeah.
does, actually. Councils have strongly emphasised the need for central government to absorb escalating costs and provide clarity on post 2028 funding arrangements. In the absence of such assurances, there remains a material risk that local authorities will continue to bear unsustainable financial and legal burdens within an already strained system. And on that stark warning note, that's it for another edition of the podcast. You can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 22, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And for me too. Bye bye now.